We have Meshach Joram, who is the Chief for the Institute of Directors here in Kenya, and Celestine Munda, who is from Ernst & Young, or EY. Thank you both for joining us. Well, I'll start by asking, why is it important to have a female representation on boards? I don't know who I should pose this question to, but if I'm to say ladies first, I guess I'll go with Celestine.
I think, first of all, including women in the board recognizes that 50% of our global talent is women.
Right.
So just by excluding them, you're removing 50% from your talent pool. The second is obviously the diversity they bring to the board. Women have a different way of resolving problems. They have a different way of approaching issues. And they just bring a fresh approach to thinking on the board. So just for that, you know, the fact that you can bring a different perspective can result in outcome, you know, for the board. So it's a population that must be included.
All right. And Meshach, does this translate into an increase in financial income, in this case for corporate companies?
Yes, indeed it does. From the various researches that have been done the world over, what is clear is that having gender diversity in the board has a positive impact on the performance of the company. Looking at the return on investments that companies generate as a result of having diversity in the boardroom, there's a correlation between the performance and the aspect of gender diversity. Yes.
Okay. Now let's look at some of the barriers or the hindrances. Why are we not seeing more women on boards? Is there a specific reason? Is it because it's an African thing? What exactly could be some of the reasons, Meshach?
There are various reasons, but maybe first of all what we have to appreciate is how far we've come as a country. From the statistics, we've seen that Kenya is leading. But of course, that doesn't mean that we don't have challenges. Some of the reasons that impact on women representation on boards could be historical, like you've said. Previously, what we have known is that placement on boards was based on existing networks, what I would term as, say, old boy networks. And of course, that has an impact on the people that are represented in the boards.
Right.
Historically, there has been a challenge because we are coming from a history where there were fewer women who were getting into positions of leadership, of course, through the education and all that. But increasingly, that has changed. And it is believed that the reflection that we are seeing is as a result of that. Maybe to also just add on that, there was also the issue of legislation. The new constitution now brings in the aspect of 30% representation of either gender in the boards. Previously, this was not the case, and of course, that also had an impact. What we are now increasingly seeing in our country is that there is a more proactive approach in terms of making sure that there are more women who are sitting on boards. Another challenge, of course, that has been mentioned many times is the question of the right qualifications that perhaps at some point in time it was felt that maybe the women did not have, but that has also changed a lot, because as we are able to see, there are more women who are getting into fields which were previously considered only to be male-dominated fields. Yes.
All right. Let me come to you, Celestine. You know, from some of the statistics as well that we are seeing is that, you know, business culture has always meant that the bigger chunk of board representation goes to the males. But do you think that this is something that we can get rid of, that we can get to a point where it's going to be balanced?
I think just to add on to what Meshach has said, one of the key accelerators of that is legislation. So we are fortunate that we have the constitution that mandates that we must have 33% of our representation being women. Over and above that, in the private sector, one of the things we are agitating is to have a strong corporate governance code. So you mentioned countries like South Africa, where in terms of the King Code of Corporate Governance, we must have women representation of part of their equity measurements. Essentially what that means is if you have women on the board, if you have women across your ranks, as an organization, you have access, to good government contracts, so that's an incentive. If you draw that now outside our borders and outside our continent, one of the things that is being enforced is that when you have the law, there's a penalty for not complying. So in some areas, you risk delisting, you risk dissolution, you risk a financial penalty, all of those driving that. But coming to the softer things, it's really about also changing our culture as corporates, making sure that we have policies that are friendly to the development and advancement of women,
right?
So that we have more of them on the board. And the studies have shown that unless you do that sustainably throughout the organization, it doesn't change.
All right, so what would you say would be the perfect representation for companies? Because if we look at East Africa Breweries Limited, for example, by December 2013, we're looking at 5 women out of the 11 board members being female. And for Safaricom, which actually is the second top in Kenya, we're looking at 3 women out of 10 total representation. But do you think this is the perfect number?
So ideally, for me, the representation should represent the demographics. So globally and even coming to Kenya, women are about 50% of our population.
Right.
But if you look at recent studies, we refer to the African Development Bank one, there's a World Bank one, and there's a recent one that Ernst & Young did with the Peterson Institute for International Economics. What it said is the minimum number to have the desired impact is 3. Or 30% even, because when you have that critical mass to influence opinion, you have a louder voice, if I may say that, in a board, compared to when you have one.
Okay.
The one voice tends to drown,
All right. Let's
billion.
talk about listed companies and the role they can play in ensuring that we are seeing more women on companies' boards. How exactly do you think this can be implemented, Meshach?
Maybe it's just good for us to mention that last week the draft code of corporate governance were published, and the issue of gender diversity has prominently featured in the proposed corporate governance guidelines. And that is one thing that we believe will be able to positively impact on the listed companies in terms of having more women represented in the boards.
Right.
Apart from that, the push for even the private sector to also embrace the need to have more women on boards. And of course, that will also translate to the listed companies and more companies in the public sector taking that up as well. We cannot overemphasize how important it is for people to look at the positive things, the positive impact that we're going to derive from having this legislation, and moving just away from it being a legislation and making sure that we implement the recommendations that are made within the guidelines.
All right, so there's this belief that, the females, or at least our biggest brains, have only been subjected to, being at the top in marketing, communications, companies, as well as fashion. But do you think that this narrative can be changed? And if yes, can it be changed?
It is changing. If you look at the companies that have been quoted in the African Development Research, 2 of those are in basic resources. So there's Kumba Iron, and then you have Impala. So those are companies in mining, which is traditionally a male environment. Secondly, if you look at the kind of education our people, males and females, are getting today, we have an equal number of engineers coming out. So this is a pool that's available for use on that. So it is open to them. Having said that, one area where we still see a dearth of females is in the area of hard transport, so long haulage transport. That's an area where we are seeing a dearth of women. The other one, which is surprising, especially for us as Kenyans, is agriculture, where we would expect to see women, again, a lower number, and there's something that can be done to elevate the opportunities that are available for women.
All right, you talk about agriculture and how we're still seeing a lower number. But again, we are also looking at a report that says that 70% of the women are involved in agriculture. Do you think this is just subsistence agriculture and not exactly commercial agriculture?
It is subsistence. There are some that are already venturing into commercial agriculture. But when you look at board representation and executive representation, it's a far lower number than we should be, desiring. And there should be a push at actually spelling out what that career opportunity is for women and how they can contribute at the executive level and at the board level.
All right.